Talent hits a target no one else can hit. Genius hits a target no one else can see. Compassion is the basis of morality. A man can be himself only so long as he is alone. And if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free. The assumption that animals are without rights and the illusion that our treatment of them has no moral significance is a positively outrageous example of Western crudity and barbarity. Universal compassion is the only guarantee of morality. Mostly it is loss which teaches us about the worth of things. Happiness consists in frequent repetition of pleasure. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. It is difficult to find happiness within oneself, but it is impossible to find it anywhere else. The person who writes for fools is always sure of a large audience. They tell us that suicide is the greatest piece of cowardice and that suicide is wrong, when it is quite obvious that there is nothing in this world to which every man has a more unassailable title than to his own life and person. Every miserable fool who has nothing at all of which he can be proud adopts as a last resource pride in the nation to which he belongs. He is ready and happy to defend all its faults and follies tooth and nail, thus reimbursing himself for his own inferiority. One should use common words to say uncommon things. Compassion for animals is intimately associated with goodness of character, and it may be confidently asserted that he who is cruel to animals cannot be a good man. And that when you're buying books, you're optimistically thinking you're buying the time to read them. Life is a constant process of dying. We forfeit 3/4 of ourselves in order to be like other people. A sense of humor is the only divine quality of man. A high degree of intellect tends to make a man unsocial. We will gradually become indifferent to what goes on in the minds of other people when we acquire a knowledge of the superficial nature of their thoughts, the narrowness of their views, and of the number of their errors. Whoever attaches a lot of value to the opinions of others pays them too much honor. If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, would the human race continue to exist? Would not a man rather have so much sympathy with the coming generation as to spare it the burden of existence, or at any rate not take it upon himself to impose that burden upon it in cold blood? It is a wise thing to be polite. Consequently, it is a stupid thing to be rude. To make enemies by unnecessary and willful incivility is just as insane a proceeding as to set your house on fire. For politeness is like a counter in a avowedly false coin, with which it is foolish to be stingy. What disturbs and depresses young people is the hunt for happiness on the firm assumption that it must be met within life. From this arises constantly deluded hope and so also dissatisfaction. Deceptive images of a vague happiness hover before us in our dreams, and we search in vain for their original. Much would have been gained if, through timely advice and instruction, young people could have had eradicated from their minds the erroneous notion that the world has a great deal to offer them. It would be better if there were nothing. Since there is more pain than pleasure on earth, every satisfaction is only transitory, creating new desires and new distresses, and the agony of the devoured animal is always far greater than the pleasure of the devourer. Religion is the masterpiece of the art of animal training, for it trains people as to how they shall think. Treat a work of art like a prince. Let it speak to you first. Great men are like eagles, and build their nest on some lofty solitude. So the problem is not so much to see what nobody has yet seen, as to think what nobody has yet thought concerning that which everybody sees. The cheapest sort of pride is national pride. For if a man is proud of his own nation, it argues that he has no qualities of his own of which he can be proud of, otherwise he would not have recourse to those which he shares with so many millions of his fellowmen. The man who is endowed with important personal qualities will be only too ready to see clearly in what respects his own nation falls short, since their failings will be constantly before his eyes. But every miserable fool who has nothing at all of which he can be proud adopts, as a last resource, pride in the nation to which he belongs. He is ready and glad to defend all its faults and follies tooth and nail, thus reimbursing himself for his own inferiority. Life swings like a pendulum backward and forward between pain and boredom. Without books, the development of civilization would have been impossible. They are the engines of change, windows on the world, lighthouses as the poets had erected in the sea of time. They are companions, teachers, magicians, bankers of the treasures of the mind. Books are humanity in print. No rose without a thorn, but many a thorn without a rose. Hope is the confusion of the desire for a thing with its probability. We can regard our life as a uselessly disturbing episode in the blissful repose of nothingness. Philosophy is a science, and as such has no articles of faith. Accordingly, in it nothing can be assumed as existing except what is either positively given empirically or demonstrated through indubitable conclusions. Marrying means to have one's rights and double one's duties. I have not yet spoken my last word about women. I believe that if a woman succeeds in withdrawing from the mass, or rather raising herself from above the mass, she grows ceaselessly and more than a man. Reading is merely a surrogate for thinking for yourself. It means letting someone else direct your thoughts. Many books, moreover, serve merely to show how many ways there are of being wrong, and how far astray you yourself would go if you followed their guidance. You should read only when your own thoughts dry up, which will of course happen frequently enough even to the best heads. But to banish your own thoughts so as to take up a book is a sin against the Holy Ghost. It is like deserting untrammeled nature to look at a herbarium or engravings of landscapes. The inexpressible depth of music, so easy to understand and yet so inexplicable, is due to the fact that it reproduces all the emotions of our innermost being, but entirely without reality and remote from its pain. Music expresses only the quintessence of life and its events, never these themselves. The safest way of not being very miserable is not to expect to be very happy. Every parting gives a foretaste of death, every reunion a hint of the resurrection. The life of every individual, viewed as a whole and in general, and when only its most significant features are emphasized, is really a tragedy. But gone through in detail, it has the character of a comedy. Buying books would be a good thing if one could also buy the time to read them. But as a rule, the purchase of books is mistaken for the appropriation of their contents. Pleasure is never as pleasant as we expected it to be, and pain is always more painful. The pain in the world always outweighs the pleasure. If you don't believe it, compare the respective feelings of two animals, one of which is eating the other. If I maintain my silence about my secret, it is my price en rue. If I let it slip from my tongue, I am its prisoner. The shortness of life, so often lamented, may be the best thing about it. The world is my idea. Wealth is like seawater. The more we drink, the thirstier we become. And the same is true of fame. Change alone is eternal, perpetual, immortal. One can never read too little of bad or too much of good books. Bad books are intellectual poison. They destroy the mind. In order to read what is good, one must make it a condition never to read what is bad. For life is short, and both time and strength limited. Almost all of our sorrows spring out of our relations with other people. There is no more mistaken path to happiness than worldliness. If we were not also interested in ourselves, life would be so uninteresting that none of us would be able to endure it. To feel envy is human, to savor schadenfreude is devilish. We seldom think of what we have, but always of what we lack. Faith is like love. It does not let itself be forced.